So I have finally finished playing through Unicorn Overlord a little over a month after the game originally came out at the time of recording this, and I just have to say, even though it took me forever, I honestly could not put this game down, even going way back to the demo. But outside of that, and the interesting controversy surrounding the dialogue within this game, and this game having one of the worst names of all time, in this video, I'm going to briefly cover my thoughts on the game in its entirety, including everything from the gameplay to the characters, and last but definitely not least, I'm going to discuss, obviously, the story. And just in case you do not want any spoilers, there are time codes in the description. With all of that being said, let's get right into it, starting with the most in-your-face part of the game, that being the graphics, which I cannot say enough are absolutely stunning. The art style for this game is the whole reason I became interested in this game in the first place, and it has not disappointed whatsoever. The music is 10 out of 10, and the voice acting is also very great, to say the least. Next, the gameplay, which definitely sets it apart from most RPGs that I've ever played. Every single battle in this game is set in stages that flow in real time, with you deploying units at set bases that fly the color of your troop, in this case being blue. You also must follow a set of victory conditions to complete these maps, and the part that makes it the most interesting is there are also valor points that determine how often and how many units you can deploy at any given time. And you can even use these valor points to activate special abilities that each individual character has. These valor points can be replenished in a variety of ways, like defeating enemies, liberating towns, and more. And if you liberate a town or fort, you can deploy units from those two spots as well. Lastly, the battles themselves are also fairly interesting and definitely more unique than any game that I can really think of, but the battles are automatically played out determined by a handful of things, such as initiative, which decides the turn order that each of these characters go through, and what are known as action points, that are used up when a character takes their turn to use their active skills, and it will continue to cycle through until all of the units on both sides either die or run out of action points. There are also passive points that can be used by passive skills such as healing, defending an ally, attacking one last time before the battle ends, or any number of things. It's also extremely unique that once the battle ends, if the enemy unit isn't completely defeated, whichever side has the lower health percentage at the end of the battle is determined to be the loser of the battle and are knocked into what is called a waiting state that renders them immobile for a short amount of time, which you do not ever want to be put in, because if they are attacked, the unit that is attacking someone in a waiting state is granted a first strike regardless of the initiative on either side. Now, as for the story, without going into any spoilers real quick, it's honestly very interesting and throws a lot of information at you very quickly, which makes it pretty exciting if you're interested in the lore of this game. But going into spoilers, the game starts off with a very anime-styled intro that shows all of the affiliated nations in this game and a plethora of characters that will presumably be met. Afterwards, we then see the game's prologue of the prologue, that begins with Queen Elena being hunted down by a traitorous general named Valmor, before she is eventually captured or even possibly killed in a battle within the capital of the city of Cornia, the country she previously reigned over. Before we see General Valmor claim Queen Elena's throne and eventually go on to establish Zenoira and conquer the continent of Fevrith, which this entire game is set in, the Queen's son, our protagonist, Elaine, is smuggled out of the city by a holy knight named Joseph. So, after all of that transpires, we fast forward 10 years later, where we see that the entire continent has been conquered by this General Valmor, who now goes by Galerius. Then we see a grown Elaine training alongside his childhood friend Lex, before seeing a ship with a Zenoiran banner in the distance approaching the island that Joseph fled to with Elaine. Both Elaine and Lex then jump into action, with Elaine going to a nearby cathedral, while Lex headed to a nearby town to warn the villagers of the oncoming attack. We then see the Zenoiran soldiers landing in the harbor led by Hodrick, a man who used to fight by Queen Elena's side. Jumping over, we see Elaine saving a cleric named Scarlet from being captured that flows directly into a tutorial that details out all of the gameplay mechanics that I covered earlier. They then move on to unite with Lex after liberating the town from a group of Zenoiran soldiers and continue on to the harbor to confront Hodrick. After defeating him, Joseph and Elaine confront him to learn why he betrayed the Queen queen before cutting him down, when suddenly a ring that was given to Elaine that was once owned by his mother begins to glow with magical energy to wipe a spell that was forcing Hodrick to fight against his will. And this is where Hodrick reveals that all of Queen Elena's allies had turned against her in this fight, which Joseph theorizes is how Galerius was able to quickly conquer the entire continent. We also learn that the ring is called the Unicorn Ring, and it is an artifact that belongs to Elaine's family that has the ability to purify evil, though it was just believed to be a fairy tale. Interestingly, the god that Scarlet worships, which is a unicorn-based god, was said to have the same powers, and with all of this revealed, Elaine vows to liberate the continent as they set off towards the mainland. Now, immediately after landing, they are ambushed by Zenoiran forces who kidnap Scarlet as Galerius needs her for a reason that may have ties to her religion. But with Elaine attempting to chase after her captor, who is a man named Renal, Elaine and co are met with an army of mercenaries before quickly fleeing to a nearby building to regroup after being saved by Joseph and an individual named Clyde. During this moment of regrouping, we are taught about a variety of dynamic interactions that each class can have with one another while they are paired up together in the same unit. And after arranging some of the groups of units, Elaine eventually makes a push to conquer the surrounding area that is occupied by the mercenaries and is successfully able to claim the area after defeating a mercenary named Aubin, who Elaine chooses to recruit after he was prepared to sacrifice himself so the rest of his mercenaries could flee. And after claiming the fort that Aubin protected, we are able to customize the banner that Elaine flies, which I think is pretty cool, even though it's a pretty redundant feature. Now, after expanding the number of characters that we can have in a single unit, we are forced to buy some gear at a nearby town, and then Elaine sets off to liberate the surrounding areas, starting with a nearby town that has been raided by bandits led by a man named Gamel, which I do want to note because I made this mistake. He is recruitable. I don't know how, because I fucked it up. But after that, Elaine sets off to clear out an area that is under control by a past ally of Travis's. And honestly, at first, you kind of expect each area to be very cut and dry, but the game does a very good job at not only making every area feel unique, but also making some of these situations surprisingly interesting, at least to me. One specific area was filled with bandits who only stole from the rich, and you don't even learn this until after the fact, and one of these bandits is also a daughter of a nobleman. The most interesting of them is probably the area that is tied to Monica, who is Clive's ex-fiancée, a noble of sorts who was stripped of her lands and her title, which was given to more quote-unquote loyal lords, while she serves the Zenoiran army. And while Monica willingly lets Elaine and Clive conquer the land that she is supposed to be protecting, we learn that Monica does want to fight against the Zenoirans, and the people who fight alongside her even lay down their weapons with barely any fight whatsoever. But, of course, this was all just a trap to lure you into an ambush. But after her eventual defeat, Clive speaks with her and tells her about how her grandfather actually funds the liberation, which I think is very interesting. And there's also a theme that goes to show you that a lot of these side quests are very integral to the plot in one way or another. With that aside, as Elaine finally sets his sights on saving Scarlet once and for all, I was surprised to see that this fight was more of a two-pronged attack than anything else, and is also two phases. After successfully breaking down the walls of a fortress city and defeating Renal, Elaine learns that Galerius himself took Scarlet to a nearby ancient shrine, where he is eventually confronted by Elaine and is also defeated. So after Elaine heads over to Scarlet, he discovers that Galerius's mystical wizard had used Scarlet to break a seal within the sanctuary and somehow resurrects Galerius and imbues him with a mysterious dark power. Elaine then readies himself to fight Galerius once more, but is struck down instead. And honestly, despite how fast this game went by, I'm really surprised how bold they were to have it end this way. Okay, so Elaine is revived by one of the 6 sages and is told to head to a nearby elven land to the south to activate the power of the unicorn ring in his possession, and is then told to return to this sanctuary once its quote-unquote true power is unleashed. But as Elaine exits the sanctuary, he begins to start planning alongside Joseph and others, and we are immediately given 2 options. One is to follow the heavenly voices' directions and make our way to the south, to the country country of Elheim, or the second option is to search for Elaine's cousin. This cousin is named Virginia and is currently located in Drakenhold, a country to the east. And despite the fact that the story is kind of pushing towards the elves, and obviously there's elves, so why wouldn't we want to do that first? But unfortunately, due to the fact that Elheim is a bit higher level than Drakenhold, we're gonna have to talk about Drakenhold first. After making their way into Drakenhold via the southern gate, Elaine and Joseph are immediately met with Virginia and her attendant. Once they learn of Virginia being under the protection of a Prince Gilbert, Leia tells them of the prince's plans to retake Drakenhold, and they ask Elaine and the Liberation to help them with achieving that goal. Shortly after crossing the border, there are a few individuals who mention an execution of Travis's elder sister that is occurring in a nearby town, and during the following battle, Elaine recruits a previously imprisoned healer named Prim and the mercenary who saved her, who is named Aramis. Once they both are recruited, Elaine then saves Berengaria, who is being hunted down by search parties at this point. After rescuing her and liberating the nearby town, we learn very quickly that Travis and Berengaria still very much do not get along, which is something that Travis told us previously. Now, they don't get along even more after Travis reveals to us that their father was killed by the Zenoiran forces that she ended up joining, which makes me very interested to see why exactly she joined. After heading south into Drakenhold's desert, Albion offers to guide the Liberation through the area due to growing up there, and after recruiting a handful of individuals, including Liza and Magellan, who Albion grew up with, eventually Elaine and Virginia meet with Prince Gilbert, and during their conversation, they are alerted by Berengaria that Zenoiran forces are approaching the city, and while being assisted by the biggest woman I've ever seen in a fantasy game, the forces flee. Shortly after, Berengaria was abducted by Galerius's friendly neighborhood necromancer. Once the Liberation clears through most of Drakenhold, and Elaine assists Virginia with killing the man that forced her to flee into Drakenhold in the first place, Elaine is reunited with Prince Gilbert, who reveals that he has a handful of spies among Zenoira's forces that will be useful during the retaking of his castle. Speaking of the castle, we learned very quickly that Berengaria was stationed as the general of said castle, and once she is taken down, we learn Berengaria's reason for joining the Zenoiran army in the first place, which was to find the ancient armor that she is currently wearing to eventually use it against Zenoira. She also reveals the reason for forcing Travis out of their bandit group in the first place, but before any of that occurred, while preparing to retake the castle, it is revealed to us that Aramis is none other than Prince Gilbert's elder brother, Ludwig von Drakenhold. And during this same time, Virginia ends up explaining to Elaine that she felt both relieved to see that he was alive, and also disappointed that she could no longer be in line to rule Cornia once it was liberated. All of that leads up to Virginia then asking Elaine to convince Ludwig to reunite with his younger brother, which would effectively be asking Ludwig to retake the throne, if you really think about it. At least that was my thought process behind it when I told Virginia no. I mean, she said it herself. Gilbert only had the courage to take on such an important role after Ludwig's supposed death, so I think it's probably best to let Ludwig do whatever he thinks is best. Which, given how spiteful Gilbert seems to be about Berengaria and Travis's reuniting, given that he feels forsaken by his elder brother, maybe it wasn't exactly the best option. But you know, despite Gilbert doubting his ability to rule Drakenholds, and even telling Elaine that he wanted to join the Liberation should his brother return and take the throne from him, which means that maybe I did make the wrong choice. I'm not really sure. Gilbert then decides to become the King of Drakenhold anyways, and dedicates any and all forces to the Liberation's cause whenever they may need it. And with that, the Drakenhold Saga concludes. So, upon entering Elheim via a forest near the swamp that Elaine initially recruited Yana in, she offers to guide the Liberation Army through this magical forest that typically causes those who move through it to get lost in some way. And while guiding them through it, Yana and Elaine encounter an elven priestess named Rosalinda, who was on her way to Yana's village to ask Yana for assistance. During this conversation, we learn that not only is Rosalinda the elder sister of the individual that the Great Sage sent us us to Elheim to find, but we also learn that Eltalinda is being held captive by Zenoiran forces who are led by Alcina, a sorceress who mentored Yana at one point in time. And this Alcina is presumably under Galerius's control like Hodrick and Renault. So after assisting Legolas, recruiting Riddell, and liberating a handful of villages, Elaine and co. very quickly find themselves at the gate of Elheim's capital, where we find Eltalinda, who is under the influence of Zenoira's weird mind magic. She even shows zero remorse in ordering soldiers to kill her own sister alongside with the other quote-unquote rebels. And once Elaine knocked her unconscious and defeated the racist piece of shit general accompanying her, the witch Alcina made an appearance and revealed that actually she isn't under the influence of the weird mind magic. Rather, she was the one who was putting everyone under the influence of the weird mind magic, which is weird. After she disappears, as soon as she arrived, Elaine discusses the shrine of the great sage in Cornia with Eltalinda, and we learn that she does not know much about what the sage was speaking of, but she does remember seeing a few books in an archive to the west of the capital known as the Tower of Thorns. Eltalinda then promises that if Elaine is able to reclaim it from Zenoira, then she will assist him with whatever he needs. Meanwhile, it seems that Gaeli survived, but only for a short amount of time, because after attempting to burn down the oldest tree in Elheim, he fled only to be killed by his own men. And before he died, Joseph and Hodrick questioned why he would continue to serve Zenoira despite the fact that Elaine was attempting to bring back the country he was so loyal to 10 years prior. And Gaeli explained that he has no faith in Elaine due to Elaine's father, which now has me very interested in who Elaine's father is. Elaine and Eltalinda visited the gigantic tree that I am not going to attempt to pronounce because words suck. But while at this tree, both Eltalinda and Yana explain to Elaine that this tree protects the entirety of Elheim due to its connection with the Fae that inhabit both the Winding Woods and the rest of the country. But once the group moves on, they immediately are met with a portion of the country that has been desecrated and corrupted by none other than the necromancer Baltro, with presumably the assistance of Alcina, who, speaking of necromancy, attacks the liberation with armies of undead while Alcina seeks to revive a man named Gerard, who I am assuming is either Elaine's father or grandfather, given that he is quite literally just a copy-paste Elaine's character design. But after defeating literal hordes of undead elves and their master Baltro ends up casting a spell on Elaine that binds him. And as Baltro prepares to kill both Elaine and Eltalinda, Alcina intervenes, freeing Elaine, where she explains that the mind control magic isn't actually mind control. This is where this whole mind control magic thing actually goes from, being a dumb hand-wavy thing to a really thought-out mechanic, if I want to be honest. But anyways, the magic that Zenoira uses is actually essentially possession, where a soul of both the living or the dead is placed within the body of whoever the spell is cast on. So I think I'm pretty sure I know where this is going, as Elaine and Eltalinda chase her to the Tower of Thorns, where, with the assistance of a city of dark elves in the vicinity, Elaine and the Liberation commence in probably the most interesting battle that I've played so far in this game. At first I thought it was fairly simple given how close Alcina was to the spawn point, but once Alcina was defeated, she teleported to another location to heal. It was really fun how dynamic this was, even though it's a very simple mechanic. Once she is successfully defeated and flees to within the tower, in her final moments, she reveals exactly what I thought. Alcina had hoped to bring Elaine's grandfather's soul into Elaine's body so that King Gerard may live once more. And shortly after she takes her final breath, we learn that a majority of the archive had already been destroyed at this point. And once Elaine promises to assist Eltalinda and Elheim in any way that they need going forward, he follows it up by asking about the books that discuss the Unicorn Ring. And this is where Eltalinda informs him that the only information that had survived describes that he needs to perform what is known as a Rite of the Covenant before the ring will be fully restored. Which, given that this covenant involves a Ring of the Maiden, I'm guessing we're not going to be doing this rite anytime soon. At least, I won't. So, with Eltalinda and Rosalinda vowing to assist the Liberation with continuing its campaign of liberating Fevrith, they make their way to the northern kingdom of Bastorias after a brief visit on the island where this entire campaign began. And this is also where Rosalinda shoots her shot with Elaine after explaining how the Rite of the Covenant works. And as Elaine and the Liberation make their way to the Frozen North, Lex has a close call during a fight with a werewolf, which I will get to later. And after chasing down a girl named Unifi, who attacked Elaine and Lex thinking that they were a part of the Zenoiran army, we learn that she is a part of a rebellion known as the Frostblooms. But this introduction to the Frostblooms and one of their leaders, a lion bestial known as Morard, is cut very short when Zenoira attacks the capital of these rebels looking for a blue stone called the Bastorias Blue. And this Bastorias Blue is passed down through the generations by the leaders of the lion bestial clan, and this gem is currently in the possession of an owl bestial known as Ramona, who is currently within the city that is being attacked. Or it was, because apparently she hid it somewhere in the tundra of Bastorias. After being asked to assist them with recovering it, Elaine and co head to a ravine west of this city, where they end up recovering it before the gem is stolen by a soldier named Elgor and is given to a wizard named Raymond, who proceeded to cast a spell on Morard that is fairly similar to the spell that has been making all of the Bestrels go berserk that the Liberation had been encountering up until this point. And with Morard attempting to kill Elaine, a necklace in Unifi's possession lets off a bright blue light that immediately knocks out Morard. Now, while they are returning to a nearby camp, Morard is given a vision of himself unconscious near 3 giant statues of swords. We learn from Ramona that Morard doesn't remember much of his past outside of the last 8 years, and the same is true for Unifi, interestingly enough. But before we get any answers on any of this memory loss stuff, or even what Unifi's pendant is, Morard interrupts after waking up and insists on hunting down Raymond, who is in a castle to the west. And after assisting a fox bestial known as Dina, running into Nina's old bandit group, the Rock Rats, freeing a bestial orphanage from being sold off to slavery by the Zenoiran General Beaumont that we previously dealt with alongside Yana all that time ago, and I'm not really going to talk about the fact that this guy was literally just let off scot-free after trying to sell kids off as slaves, because I feel like it's obvious how insane this is, and he should not be alive. After all of that, we are shown a cutscene of Raymond gloating that the gem is finally his, and declares that he is going to conquer the land of quote-unquote primitive beasts, because they are quote-unquote unable to govern themselves, which is wow. His extremely fucked monologue is cut short by the arrival of Elaine and the Liberation Army, and after steamrolling through his forces comprised of unfortunately berserk bestrels, it is revealed to Elaine, Unifi, and Morard that the Bastorias Blue is only a symbol of the King of Bestrels because of its ability to mind control bestrels. And just before Raymond is apprehended and thrown into a dungeon somewhere, he teleports to the outskirts of a port town on the western coast, where he is intercepted and assassinated by Elgor, who reveals himself to be a rat bestial wearing the ancient Zenoiran armor, exactly like Berengaria's armor. And he intends to use the mind-controlling gem to rebel against Zenoira and form his own empire, which, quite honestly, I don't really think is a horrible idea, just maybe, I don't know, don't mind control people to make an empire? Just a suggestion. But with that being said, I can't really help but feel bad for Elgor, because after he is defeated, he reveals that he was gifted his strength by various experiments that were conducted on him by the necromancer Baltro. And Elgor was the only individual that was experimented on that didn't lose their sanity in the process. So he intended to use the Bastorias Blue to free the other experimented on bestrels and give them a home where they didn't have to live in fear. It's quite honestly a very beautiful idea, but obviously terrible execution. Elgor also gives Elaine and co some documents detailing Baltro's plans with the gem, and within the documents, Ramona finds that a hidden capability of the gem is the ability to turn humans into bestrels. And with this reveal, Morard keeps the train going by telling the group that he was once a human. Specifically, 8 years ago, he was a Zenoiran soldier that was a part of a group that took the Lion King's daughter hostage and was turned into a lion bestial after betraying Zenoira and siding with the lion Bestrels during a big battle. And as Morard lay dying after this bloody battle, the Lion King turned Morard into a Bestrel, saving his life. This story also helped Unifi realize that her pendant once belonged to the Lion Bestrel Princess, due to it holding a small sliver of the Bastorias Blue. And to be honest, I don't know if that means that Unifi is the princess, or if Morard gifted this pendant to her. It's never really clarified, at least to my knowledge. If you know, let me know in the comments. With Bastorias being liberated, Elaine sets his sights on Albion, with Scarlet requesting that they search for her father, the Pontifex. And soon after arriving on the northern shores, Elaine and Scarlet find the unconscious body of Scarlet's retainer, Renice, who is currently being chased by Zenoiran forces that are led by a man named Bradley, who once fought alongside the Queen before willingly betraying Cornia. Renice then reveals that all of the nobles of Albion refused to bend the knee to Zenoira's will, and are currently revolting against the Zenoiran occupation, hence why she was fleeing. Elaine and co. head to a nearby abbey to the south that Renice needs assistance defending, and after recruiting a local lord with a love of baking, another lord who had his son killed in a twisted way to beat him into submission by Zenoira, as well as liberating half of Albion, the liberation makes its way that much closer to the capital city of Albion. And as they do so, Travis scouts ahead and manages to catch a few soldiers along the way that are then interrogated by Joseph. The most important bit of information that Joseph was able to gather from these guards is that all of the posts and where all of the soldiers are stationed currently is dictated by the Pontifex. The only problem is, the Pontifex should be dead, unless Galerius was lying about the Pontifex dying, but then it wouldn't make any sense as to why he needed Scarlet for his little ritual to become a god or whatever. Another issue with this is that because of the fact that Scarlet is the only child of the Pontifex, that also makes Scarlet the Pontifex. So either Galerius lied and Scarlet was needed for the ritual for an entirely different reason, or there is a different soul inhabiting the body of the Pontifex. And typically, just busting in there and figuring out whatever is going on would be the answer, but since the Pontifex is a religious figure that is worshipped by like half the continent, that would ruin a lot of support for the liberation if this was solved with violence. So, as the liberation makes its way to the capital, they encounter Nigel, one of the few individuals who helped Scarlet escape to the island of Palevia. Nigel also mentions that Elaine was prophesized by Scarlet's father during their brief discussion, before Nigel eventually went back to the capital to question why the church's army is after Scarlet, as well as if the Pontifex is actually alive or not. And after receiving a series of non-answers, Nigel then bursts into the Pontifex chambers later that night, where he finds that Baltro has reanimated the Pontifex's corpse, and even paints Nigel as a heretic as Nigel flees to inform Elaine, and more importantly Scarlet, of her father's fate. Now, with Nigel assisting the liberation, while making their way through Zenoira's forces to the gate of the capital, and Nigel assisting them with beating some sense into an angel named Santino that has been working with Baltro, Santino then explains that he went to Baltro in an effort to prevent the whole faith from collapsing in on itself, which I guess is fair? Why he thought going to his new overlords instead of friends, i.e. Nigel, that has, been around him for years and years for assistance with this problem is beyond me. But as Santino attempts to ask Scarlet to take her rightful place as the new Pontifex, Scarlet refuses to do so until everything is said and done with Zenoira. Now, after further discussion and a bit of a heart-to-heart between Elaine and Scarlet, Scarlet's design is altered because she's given a new staff that once belonged to her father, and now, with all of that, Elaine and Scarlet set their sights on the sanctuaries across Fevrith. But first, Elaine has to complete the Rite of the Covenant. Now, there are a lot of characters that I like Elaine's supports with, so my options were Travis, Aramis, Melisandre, Eltolinda, Rosalinda, Yana, Liza, Unifi, and obviously Scarlet. The choice was honestly a lot harder than it had any right to be, but because I didn't want to pull a Your Lion April and tear the heart out of a childhood friend's chest, and also because I really like Scarlet, I chose her. So with that out of the way, we head towards the sanctuaries. Starting at Albion's sanctuary, we learn that the angels were created by ancient Zenoirans who attempted to create something comparable to the gods themselves, and after doing so, they continued their experiments and ended up creating the first Pontifex. We also learn that all of the sanctuaries serve two purposes. One is to calm the souls of the dead, and the other is a power of cleansing. Now, Galerius released the souls but left the secondary power of these sanctuaries untouched. And now Scarlet imbues Elaine's ring with the power of cleansing. Within Elheim's sanctuary, Scarlet and Elaine are joined by Eltalinda, and after more power is imbued into the unicorn ring, Eltalinda asks why the sanctuaries were built, and after learning why, Eltalinda asks a follow-up question concerning why Zenoira fell to begin with, which is where we learned that it is due to Zenoira's pursuit of immortality that they ended up sacrificing a unicorn, and in the unicorn's dying breath, it cursed Zenoira, and in doing so, all Zenoirans were horribly mutilated with a single survivor. This single survivor is a girl that communed with the unicorn, and alongside the Pontifex and the elven leader at the time, they all attempted to bring the Zenoiran souls peace, which then led to the construction of the 6 sanctuaries within Fevrith. 1 sanctuary in each country aside from Cornia, which has 2. It also turns out that this girl would go on to become Cornia's first queen, and after bringing the souls to rest, she relinquishes her powers and imbues her powers into 2 rings, these rings being the Unicorn Ring and the Maiden Ring. Within Drakenhold Sanctuary, they are joined by Berengaria, who questions the sage about Baltro, and it is revealed that he is the only survivor of Zenoira's original empire, and has lived for centuries thanks to what is called the Rite of Channeling. In Bastorias, they are joined by Morard and Unifi, where they question the purpose of the Bastorias Blue, and learn that it was created by the elves who once lived in Bastorias. And, unfortunately, these elves were unable to defend themselves in the same way that the elves in Elheim were able to, since they didn't have a massive magical tree to protect their forests. Instead, the elves in Bastorias made crystals and used it to transform themselves into Bestrels, and could even transform themselves back into elves, with a technique that has long been lost to time. Within Cornia's first sanctuary, Elaine asks if Galerius is actually Zenoira's first emperor, and in return, we learn that the Zenoirans actually come from a far-off land that was destroyed due to a civil war, and that Fevrith was home to various civilizations that outside of Elheim were all destroyed by Zenoira. We also learn that General Valmor wasn't possessed by the soul of the first emperor, but imbued with something far too evil to be banished, with something as simple as killing Galerius, and would require the power of cleansing to truly destroy. Within Cornia's second sanctuary, which is the sanctuary that started the entire restoration of this ring in the first place, Elaine learns that the souls of Zenoira were cursed and turned into essentially ghosts that are stuck to watch the world move on without them. And in order to successfully use the power of cleansing on Galerius, Elaine must cleanse all of the Zenoiran souls and put them to rest. Elaine also discovers that Galerius's true goal is to resurrect the souls of the ancient Zenoirans. So, with the blessing of the final great sage, all that is left to do is to storm the capital of Cornia, and as the liberation reaches the gates of the capital, both Travis and Clive inform Elaine that Zenoira has been slaughtering all of the civilians within the capital city, and as Elaine and the liberation prepare to head within the city, it is covered in a dark purple cloud of miasma, and the only way to get rid of this cloud is to defeat Galerius's 4 horsemen that are located at 4 separate points along the gate. As these horsemen are defeated, we see Galerius rallying his forces as he sends them forward to protect a sigil that will bring forth the souls of the dead upon completion. And while attempting to delay Elaine and the liberation, he uses his mind control magic from a great distance, prompting Elaine to use the powers of the Unicorn Ring, and after using it to cleanse everyone, the final encounter comes to a close with Elaine attempting to cleanse Galerius. But Galerius retaliates as Baltro makes himself known. Baltro then informs Galerius that one last soul is required to complete the sigil, and as Galerius begins to prepare to offer up Elaine's soul, Baltro throws a curveball, as it is actually Galerius' soul that is required to complete this spell. With Baltro stealing Galerius' soul, the body of armor vanishes, revealing the body of Queen Elenia as she collapses on the floor. And with this reveal, we also learn that 10 years ago, the Queen defeated General Valmor, but Baltro cast a spell on the Queen that could only force a descendant of the Maiden to become the vessel of Galerius. Now, as Baltro opens the sigil, Elaine prepares for the second stage, as he orders Joseph to take his mother to safety. So, along with only being able to defeat Baltro with Elaine, due to the ring gifting him a powerful attack that imbues his blade with light, and it is taking everything out of me to not make a Star Wars reference, and as Baltro is defeated, he reveals that he is actually feeding on the souls of the Zenoirans, not resurrecting them, and he is feeding them into a form of magic intended to create a primitive monster capable of destroying Fevrith with ease. And in an act to prevent this, Elaine calls upon the souls to assist him with preventing Baltro's goals. And as the Ring of the Unicorn begins to absorb the magical energies and alter the purpose of the sigil with the assistance of the Great Sages, who use their powers to prevent Baltro from fleeing from this sigil, we learn that apparently the Sages were once students of Baltro's. Regardless, with their assistance, Elaine and whoever you gave the Maiden Ring finally destroy Baltro once and for all. Now, in the aftermath of the battle, Elaine is coronated and will forever be remembered in the history books of Fevrith as the Unicorn Overlord. I'm not joking, this game is never beating the Fire Emblem allegations. After the credits, we get a breakdown with what all of the characters do after the war, and then the game ends, with Elaine being married to whoever you chose for the Rite of the Covenant, as long as they are a female. If you choose a guy, then you get some lame platonic ending, like people genuinely try to convince themselves happens with Ike and Soren. Anyways, when Galerius is defeated, you're given the option to execute him or to attempt to cleanse his soul. And obviously, on my first run through, I chose to cleanse Galerius. And if you choose execution, you of course kill Queen Elenia. And as the only living descendant of the Maiden, Galerius' soul immediately possesses Elaine, giving Galerius the Unicorn Ring, at least temporarily, as Elaine refuses to lie down and let Galerius control him, and with the combined powers of love and the Unicorn Ring and the Maiden Ring, Galerius' soul is destroyed, thus destroying the sigil without Baltro ever having hopes for releasing the souls. And I just want to mention, this game absolutely pulls a Fire Emblem and just doesn't address Baltro whatsoever. This is really the, those who slither in the dark plot for most routes in Fire Emblem Three Houses, but I'm just gonna put that aside. Moving on to the postgame. It's fairly light outside of being able to loop back to before the final battle and also being able to swap out who you gave the Maiden Ring to, which I think is pretty cool. Outside of that though, Elaine is reached out to by the Great Sages, who invite him to purge the ancient Zenoiran capital of the souls that still reside there, and it's pretty much just a massive battle where we battle literally every named NPC that we've ever met, both within the Liberation and not. On top of that, we also get to recruit all of the originally non-recruitable NPCs like Alcina, Gaily, Elgor, and more. All of this culminates into Elaine, or whoever you choose, defeating, well, Elaine. And yeah, once the quest ends, that's everything. It's kind of anticlimactic, but yeah, with all of that being said, it is now review time. So, without diving into spoilers, this game is absolutely amazing. I think it's fairly obvious I was going to say that from all of the praise that I've been doing previously, from the gameplay to the music and the art style, but on top of all of that, the game itself has so much content, from exploring the map, playing the minigames, and even the seamlessly endless number of characters to use and interact with, which honestly is probably the biggest selling point of this game, maybe? I don't know. Because every single character is interesting in their own way and have a number of supports that are each unique, and it is also interesting to see how these characters interact with one another. Not to mention, the number of classes there are is absolutely insane. There are even variations of classes depending on which continent characters are from. And honestly, even though from what I understand, the story is about 30 or so hours, I ended up spending about 90 hours on this game because of the overwhelming amount of content. But outside of those aspects, the story is even pretty interesting and is honestly amplified by the amount of side quests that all feel important themselves, due to there being a handful of somewhat story-related events, but I'm not going to dive into specifics, of course. Now, the battles are obviously the bread and butter of the game, and are even one of the best aspects of the game in my opinion, due to the variety of gimmicks that can be used provided by the characters you use, the map itself, and even items you can buy. Now, the final thing I want to discuss for this spoiler-free review is the lore, which is absolutely fantastic and so complex. And I just want to point out, the archive is one of the most innovative things about this game, as it delves even deeper into characters, the races, the nations, places you visited, literally anything related to the game in any way, there is an archive entry for, and you can read some stuff that explains anything that you could possibly be confused about or even want more info on. So, is Unicorn Overlord Game of the Year? I'm not entirely sure. It's probably way too soon to give a definitive answer about any game that's come out so far this year, but as far as Unicorn Overlord's case goes, though it has everything going for it in reasons why it could be, the story is honestly the only thing thing that makes me hesitate to say that it is, at least right now. But as far as RPG of the year, Unicorn Overlord 1000% gets my vote, but how long I will continue to stand by this opinion depends entirely on how Hades 2 is, and probably Dragon Quest. Now, as far as spoilers are concerned, and I will give you a second to click away, just don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I'd appreciate that. Shameless shill aside, despite that the story is not anything mind-blowing, as I said, the lore just blew me away. Everything is so well thought out, and typically you'd really think that this was just kind of, fantasy BS, but the origins of the Bestrels and the Angels absolutely blew me away. I was not expecting there to be any reasoning for their existence, kind of like with the Elves, because there's really not any lore on the origins of the elves. But that aside, I also want to praise the fact that this wasn't a predictable story by any means. If you expected Galerius to be Queen Elenia, then I have no idea, dude. Like, you're a genius. And honestly, I was expecting it to be kind of comically predictable, even with Baltro, but I think that Baltro wanting to use the souls of the Zenoirans for a purpose outside of just bringing back an ancient empire is honestly pretty interesting. I know that it's not, the first character to do a subversion like that, but I just think that given how kind of predictable some parts of this game were, the fact that they kind of threw two curveballs at the end was really cool, at least to me, as I said. Now, moving on to some characters that I want to touch on. I just kind of want to highlight a handful of my favorite characters, one of which I feel like does not get enough love whatsoever, and the other two are just really interesting takes on certain tropes that I kind of would like to talk about. The quickest one being Joseph. Now, outside of him being a Jagan that isn't actually a Jagan, for anyone who has no idea what that means, a Jagan is basically the name of a character archetype that is typically an old knight that is available to you at the start of the game, that is typically higher level and already promoted, and is defined by the fact that they are very good at first, and the drop-off of their usefulness in the game is insane. Think Tella from Final Fantasy IV, Red from Final Fantasy VII, Frederick from Fire Emblem Awakening, and Vander from Fire Emblem Engage. Obviously, Joseph is always good, so he is a Jagan without being a Jagan. Joseph is a fantastic character. His dynamic with Lex, Chloe, and Elaine are probably one of my favorites in the game, especially considering how he and Elaine have this father-son relationship, and both reference it constantly and honestly expand on it several times, with a handful of wholesome and heartfelt moments in both their supports and even a few cutscenes throughout the game. Another character I want to touch on is Virginia. Obviously, throwing a character that is intended to quite literally be Queen Elenia, but not, could go horribly wrong for a variety of reasons, but Vanillaware easily put my worries to bed within the first interaction with her. Nothing will ever be more legendary than the Leia takes care of my every need and more line. That aside, she's also an amazing big sister figure to Elaine, and I love the fact that she even openly admits to Elaine that she would be happier if Elaine never left that small little island in the first place. And I feel like this goes without saying, but she's badass. It's that simple. I'm not really sure how I feel with her being married off to Gilbert or being forced to pull a Sweet Home Alabama. I feel like for how good of a character she is, the way that they decided to end her story is certainly something. I just wish that her ending could be something different. But hey, that's why headcanons exist, right? And finally, the last character that I want to highlight is Nina. Super quick. Honestly, I kind of am just sad that she doesn't have more supports, especially considering the fact that I think that she's a really interesting character that barely gets anything. She has a super interesting backstory, but also hits like a motherfucking truck. Since we're here, I feel like I should probably address the obvious. Given that I referenced the Fire Emblem allegations and also the Jagan archetype, a lot of people have been kind of comparing Unicorn Overlord to Fire Emblem, but honestly, I don't really see it. I mean, sure, both have blue-haired protagonists, an in-depth support system, comically evil old men who use ancient magic to brainwash influential individuals and political figures to infiltrate societies, and both of these games even let you marry your player character to your blood relative. But outside of that, these games could not be more different. I mean, outside of not being able to be openly gay and the obvious differences in gameplay, Unicorn Overlord thrives off focusing on the ensemble of characters, and encourages us to explore the world of the game, where Fire Emblem typically only revolves around a handful of characters, and yes, you could say the same for Unicorn Overlord, but the world building is a difference maker, especially considering how in every single Fire Emblem you could lose a vast majority of the class, but as long as the protagonist and maybe one or two other characters live, then you don't really miss anything in the story, which isn't a knock. I love Fire Emblem, so please do not misunderstand me. I am just pointing out the two largest differences between these games. But anyways, with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Also, let me know if you think that Unicorn Overlord and Fire Emblem are close enough to really get the comparison or not. And don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. I appreciate all of your support, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.